This story is kind of mind-bending. It involves everything fans of this channel would expect: a serial killer, cheeky Croatians, Australian state politics, rumours of bestiality, the Shire, drug dealing, allegations of pedophilia. Look, basically every conspiracy theory buzzword and more is in this story. Yet it's far from being merely the delusions of your wacko acid casualty uncle. Take it from me, a guy who makes his money going around regional Australia talking about aliens, tickets on sale now, and the man responsible for piecing together this narrative, the pioneering politician from the legalised cannabis party, Jeremy Buckingham, two markers of hard-nosed skeptics, believes in aliens, smokes a lot of pot. So, don't even worry about double-checking anything I say. You can trust that everything has been fact-checked twice, or my birth name isn't Jordan Truth Hunter Shanks. So, without further ado, here's why Australia's most notorious serial killer, Ivan Milat, the backpacker murderer, the guy who inspired Wolf Creek, was a government agent. Okay, that was a bit of clickbait. Not necessarily a government agent, but there are some really strange avenues of inquiry opening up, as Ivan Milat might have had some connections to some of the most powerful people in Australia, and to this day, there are a lot of unsolved murders that happened around his stomping ground with far too many coincidences to just ignore. And that's not me saying that every coincidence should be taken seriously, but they're at least fascinating to gawk at. Now, before we begin, I really need to credit Jeremy Buckingham. It would be amiss to claim that this is my work. This has been an 8-year-long rabbit hole Jeremy has been burrowing down into, and I'm really relying on everything that he has uncovered. But I also want to preface this video with the fact that I've actually found this story to be so confusing that I don't want you taking everything I say as gospel. I really don't know what's true and what's a bizarre coincidence and what's complete bullshit. So, really this video is a fun little true crime adventure, not a brief of evidence. Treat this differently to many of our other videos. It's not as serious or concrete as Worst Kebab Shops of Australia, I'll tell you that. But still, it's fucking gobsmacking. First off, let's start with a bit of history of Ivan Milat, in case you're unfamiliar. Ivan Milat was one of Australia's most notorious serial killers, responsible for a spate of murders of backpackers during the late 80s and early 90s. He would offer lifts to backpackers, driving them to the remote Belanglo State Forest a few hours southwest of Sydney, where he'd conduct his serial killer business. I want to avoid doing the usual rundown of Milat's classic murders, because there's about 30 made-for-TV miniseries that document them already, and if I'm going to be forced to watch Australian TV, it's going to be Ready Steady Cook every time. As opposed to the made-for-TV biopic of Milat, Ready Steady Abduct Hitchhikers, kill them and hide their bodies in the Belangalos. But what's useful to know is that it took over 4 years from the first disappearance of the Victorian couple Deborah Everest and James Gibson in December of 1989 for the police to arrest and charge Milat. During those 4 years, Milat continued to be active in the serial killing game, and bodies were intermittently being found and ID'd around the Belanglo State Forest area. And when you look at Milat's criminal history, it becomes somewhat remarkable how long it took the police to arrest Milat, as Milat had a long history with the justice system. His criminal career began at the ripe old age of 17, when in 1962 he began a spate of armed robberies. According to his brother Boris Milat, Ivan was responsible for shooting and paralysing Sydney taxi driver Neville Knight, although he was never prosecuted for this. Instead, another man called Alan Dillon took the fall, as he believed that his brother was responsible for the shooting. This same year, Ivan was in and out of children's court, charged with a few offences such as break and enter, and eventually ending up in juvie. In 1964, Milat got a job as a labourer at the New South Wales Government Water Board. Case closed, he worked for the government, confirmed. But this is a theme. Throughout his entire life, he gets little jobs like these, working for the Water Board and the RTA. Again, this same year, he's in and out of court, convicted for a bunch more crimes, such as break and enter, stealing, etc. By the end of the year, he ends up being moved between Long Bay Jail Prison and Emu Plains Prison Farm, a fenceless minimum security prison. And this is where one of Jeremy Buckingham's most publicised theories arises, and to be honest, to me, this is one of the less compelling cases, but it's worth a mention just because of some of the strange coincidences that surround it. The unsolved Wanda Beach murders on the 11th of January 1965. 15-year-olds Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock were stabbed and beaten to death, their bodies discovered crudely buried in Cronulla's windswept Wanda Beach the next day. This led to what at that point was Australia's largest ever police investigation, with thousands interviewed, yet to this day, no one's ever been charged. Some of the more compelling evidence collected was a description of the men the two girls were hanging out with the day of the murders by Marianne Schmidt's younger brother, Wolfgang.
Wolfgang Schmidt, the brother of one of the deceased girls. He describes a lad about 16 years of age whom he saw disappearing in the sand dunes with his sister and the other girl about 1:30 on the fateful day.
Now, even though Wolfgang is a very young boy, he's only 7 years old, you still feel that you could place a fair amount of importance on what he's told you?
Yes. When we first received his testimony, being so young, we were loath to accept it. But we have checked and rechecked his information. During the inquiry, every piece of information we have received has tended to confirm and corroborate his story, and we now feel that he can be relied upon and his testimony is acceptable.
There was also a description by another witness, John Dixon, who claimed to have seen two young girls walking out of the sand dunes at Wanda at 2:30 p.m. on the same day Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock were murdered. It's never been confirmed that these were the same girls, but Dixon also described seeing two young men walk out of the sand dunes. Dixon described the first man as approximately 20 years old, 5 feet 7 inches tall, a well-built, dark-haired, clean-cut man wearing black swimming trunks. The second man was slimmer, also about 20 years old, 5 feet 9 inches tall, fair-haired, wearing some kind of swimming costume. Now here is an identikit picture of a man seen at Wanda Beach the same day, and here's a picture of Ivan Milat 2 years earlier at 19. And Milat was 5'7". Honestly, to me, in my judgment, feels like a coincidence after all. Here's a picture of myself looking a lot like Ivan Milat at a similar age, but keep in mind, we are both Croats. Proud of that one. And it's also unclear whether Milat was in Long Bay, which would have completely prevented him from taking a little beach trip, or Emu Plains, which at that stage was fenceless, so a beach excursion, I guess, would be technically possible. But I wanted to mention the Wanda Beach murders because of this little fact. Now, stay focused, because this video is sprawling and I'm going to have to explain a bunch of New South Wales history for you to understand some of the threads, but trust me, it's worth it. In the second half of the 20th century, Sydney loved organised crime. It's something I really should do a whole video series on, so comment if you're interested in me making that to further entice you. It will end in my death. It's been brilliantly documented by American historian Alfred McCoy in his books The Politics of Heroin in Southeast Asia and Drug Traffic, Narcotics and Organised Crime in Australia. To get to a stage where organised crime can truly flourish, you need to have a fair deal of cooperation between the criminals, police and politicians. That cooperation boomed during World War II when the US servicemen stationed at Garden Island in Sydney Harbour took advantage of the existing illicit red light economy in King's Cross, with local brothel owners cooperating with the US military police to impose order on a potentially unruly situation. These figures were strengthened again by the return of US troops when Sydney, King's Cross in particular, became a destination that they could choose for rest and relaxation during the Vietnam War. Bangkok, Hong Kong, Taiwan, etc. You get what I'm saying. This is a pattern of how organised crime develops all over the world. Organised crime continued in New South Wales relatively unchecked due to a compromised police force until the 1995 Wood Royal Commission into the New South Wales Police Service uncovered just how obscene the police involvement in crime had become. The Royal Commission was called for by independent member for the South Coast, John Hatton, who had been railing against organised crime in New South Wales since the 1970s, when many of Sydney's worst illegal casinos were basically given the green light to operate under the state Liberal government of Premier Robert Askin. Flash forward to the 1990s, Hatton's proposal was quite vociferously being opposed by the then coalition government of New South Wales led by Premier John Fahey. Remember that name. Despite the government's opposition, the Labor Party led by then opposition leader Bob Carr had enough votes to pass Hatton's motion, chose to support it. Now, this Royal Commission was explosive. I'm not going to get into the details in this video, but it uncovered exactly what its terms had set it out to determine existed: a state of systemic and entrenched corruption within the New South Wales police. 284 police were adversely named. 12 people caught up in it killed themselves. It gave the Carr Labor government the leverage it needed to implement massive police reform, which made it all the stranger that it was opposed by the government at the time, with the Liberal Police Minister Terry Griffiths even delivering a blistering speech against it. A speech which includes this exchange between Griffiths and Labor MP Deidre Gruzovan. Mr Griffiths says, "If we were to have such an inquiry into every unresolved crime, perhaps the Australian Labor Party would seek to have the bashing of Peter Baldwin as the first inquiry. That has not been solved. Maybe we need to back down. Maybe we need to go back to Enmore to find out why Peter Baldwin was bashed. Maybe we need to investigate the cab charge scandal in Enmore. Maybe a few other things need to be page 2311 examined. We can certainly do that. Perhaps the opposition would like to see a judicial inquiry into the Botany Council affair or rezoning of the Coogee Bay Hotel. You're very relaxed about that. The Honourable Member for Heffron is awake but not too worried. She will be. Let's be serious for a moment. Would the opposition support an inquiry into the two tragic cases, the Belangolo State Forest murders or the Wanda Beach murders. Many serious crimes remain unresolved, which saddens me, but it is reality. This motion is not supported by any evidence. Honestly, most likely a funny coincidence. But it is very strange that the police minister is mentioning the Belangolo State Forest murders and the Wanda Beach murders in the same sentence, and in the context of political scandals that the Labor Party would be apprehensive about investigating 11 days before Ivan Milat is arrested. Oh, and as a little side note, Terry Griffiths was forced to resign a bit over a month later after a bunch of sexual harassment allegations against him came to light. Okay, so that's some of the interesting stuff on the Wanda Beach murders, but again, I still do reckon kind of unlikely, as Ivan probably was in prison at the time, but you have to admit, very clever way to bait you into learning New South Wales politics history by pretending it's true crime. Suck shit. Let's get back to the 1960s. Ivan gets out of his minimum security prison in June of 1965 after serving 11 months of the 18-month sentence, and not even a month later, Ivan and his brother Billy ram military police after a car chase over a panel van that they'd just stolen in Liverpool. Billy got caught by the police on the scene, but Ivan managed to run into the bush evading the police. Billy dobbed his brother in and got sentenced to 18 months for this incident, yet police took ages to catch Ivan, with him even going back to work at the water board under a fake name. He was eventually caught in November of that year, being sentenced to 2 years in prison, and it's kind of the same story again. He's released on parole in 1967 after serving 17 months, and he's back stealing cars and blowing them up for fun. This is just to give you an idea of how addicted to crime Milat was at this point. The first really serious crime that's officially on Milat's record was committed in 1971, the abduction of two 18-year-old female hitchhikers after he raped one after threatening to murder them, saying, "I'm going to have sex with both of you. If you don't, I'm going to kill you." Look, again, I don't want this video to just be reciting the details of Milat's atrocities. So all you need to know is that the women escaped after being taken to a service station where they alerted bystanders. Milat is caught the night after the car chase and charged with rape and abduction after his victims tell the police what happened. And this is where we're introduced to Ivan's long-standing lawyer, John Marsden, who I think, like most lawyer-client relations, I think that he's the far more interesting figure in this story. It's a controversial opinion, I know. Abraham Lincoln, far more interesting than his much more storied client, Illinois Central Railroad. Marsden was one of Australia's most notorious and powerful lawyers, though he was probably most famous for winning one of the largest defamation cases in Australian history after Channel 7 accused him of being a fairly prolific in the 1990s. A Pyrrhic victory, as despite winning, there were serious credibility findings against him by the judge, including the finding that on the balance of probabilities, he induced former client and convicted rapist and murderer Les Murphy to convince a witness to change his position. Yet for a variety of reasons, the judge did not find the witnesses who accused Marsden of pedophilia credible enough. For one of the witnesses, one of those reasons was that he also accused Marsden of being a drug lord responsible for shipping narcotics into Australia. It's worth mentioning at this point that in the Milat biography, Sins of the Brother, it's alleged that Ivan Milat used to go up to Queensland to traffic loads of ammunition and marijuana. After Marsden's successful defamation judgment was handed down, a man called Paul Fraser sued Marsden, alleging that when Marsden was a swimming coach, he had sexually abused him when he was just 8 years old. This man was awarded damages by the Victims' Compensation Tribunal, and this same man gave this information to the Wood Royal Commission as Marsden was on the police board, and there was a whole line of inquiry in the commission into file rings. And Marsden was a particular interest to the commission. Oh, and remember the Labor politician that the former police minister Terry Griffiths was arguing against the Police Royal Commission with was Deidre Gruzevin. This is the same Labor MP that began the flow of file rumours against Marsden by reading a statutory declaration in Parliament that alleged Marsden used drugs and had sex with underage boys. So, with that context, I present to you Ivan Milat's lawyer. So, back to 1971, when Ivan's charged with an armed robbery. This eventually gets to a trial, and it gets really strange. The witness kind of recants the testimony they gave to the police the night of the crime. Take a look at this passage of a cross-examination between Marsden and the victim detailed in the book, Sins of the Brother. Would you say in the case of this accused, that was probably your attitude, you wanted to put him off, but you were hoping he would come on? Marsden asked. Yes. Did he in any way frighten you? Not really, no. Not when I think back now, without any drama or anything. Not really, no. Did he in any way threaten you to have sex? No, not really. Did he in any way force you to have sex? No, it was my decision, more or less. It was your decision? Yes. Marsden also found out that these two victims frequented lesbian bars, reportedly because he himself saw them at one, and used that fact against them. Another pretty strange coincidence. Long story short, Marsden got Milat acquitted, and it turns out the victim was under psychiatric treatment in which she was being instructed to take responsibility for her sexual actions, which severely coloured her testimony. So Milat got off, but he was in prison anyway for a bunch of armed robberies he committed years earlier. But this is just to give you an idea of Marsden's tactics and how on the radar Milat should have been with authorities. In 1975, Milat gets out of prison and, 2 years later, 1977, tries to more hitchhikers. He just can't stop. It's his favourite crime. I get that you can have kleptomaniacs and pyromaniacs, but Milat was obsessed with this particular roadside method of murder. Which brings us to the next year, 1978, when a strange disappearance that I find rather compelling occurs. Young couple Stephen Lapthorne and Michelle Pope leave Pymble at 10 p.m. on a Friday night to drive back to Michelle's house, only a dozen kilometres away in Barrera. And yet somewhere along the way they go missing, vanish, without a trace. The 70s were wild, weren't they? If you wanted to vanish without a trace nowadays, you'd have to shoot 2 cops first. The really solid lead police had to work with was a distinct lime green 1977 Bedford CF250 panel van owned by Lapthorne. Pretty rare vehicle. The case had sat cold till this very day, yet in 2020, Rural Fire Service volunteers discovered a lime green 1977 Bedford CF250 panel van in a bushfire trail, 50 kilometres away from the Belangolo State Forest, Milat's hunting ground. Now remember, Australia's not Europe. 50 kilometres is basically next door for us. Yet police didn't go to investigate at the time and it got burnt out in the Black Summer bushfires. When they eventually got to the van, they discovered that its chassis number was only a single digit different to the one Lapthorne and Pope were driving when they went missing, with friends of the missing persons contacting former DMT employees where the van was registered, confirming that mistakes like that were regularly made as it was a manual system. Yet because of this one single digit being incorrect, police ruled out that this van was connected to the disappearance. In 2005, during an inquest, the Deputy State Coroner named Ivan Milat as a person of interest in this disappearance. And Milat was working for the RMS round the Hornsby area at the time of the disappearance. Pretty weird. And there are dozens of similar disappearances in areas that Milat used to frequent that Jeremy Buckingham has documented and that police also suspect Milat had a hand in. But the weirdest discovery of Jeremy's is this book entitled Innocent Until Proven, a novel apparently based on true events, written by a Newcastle-based lawyer by the name of Leon Sokulski. It was released in 2010, 4 years after Marsden's death. Ostensibly about Milat, but it kind of reads as a weird encoded first-person biography for a lawyer who worked for Marsden in the mid-1980s. Presumably Leon, as he did work for Marsden in the 1980s and apparently represented Milat. But again, like everything with this story, it's really confusing. But listen to this. The foreword reads as follows. This novel is a true recollection of events. It is, however, not meant to be definitive and should be read as fact/fiction. Some of the names of the people featured in this book have been changed to protect their identity. The court cases extracted in this book are taken from the transcripts of actual matters that have come before the court. Only the dates and names of some of the participants have been altered to protect the identity of those involved. This is a story that explores the relationship between serial killer Ivan Milat, his lawyer John Marsden, and 2 young attorneys employed at the Marsden law firm. This book endeavours to give the reader a true insight into the aspirations, loves and fears of young men and women embarking on their careers in one of the most demanding professions. So apparently it's a somewhat true recollection of events. If this is the case, which I'm not at all saying it is, I'm still super confused. But if it is a true recollection of events, there are some insane events regarding Milat and Marsden that have never really been examined. First off, the narrator details John Marsden having a remote-controlled James Bond-esque weed compartment opening at the click of a button, revealing bags of pot and hundreds of ready-made joints. This wasn't like nowadays, where I'm pretty sure you can get a prescription for weed as a remedy for the life-threatening illness of feeling ungroovy. This was Sydney in the 80s. Pot was still pretty illegal. The book also details a party at John Marsden's mansion in which the narrator is introduced to both the state and federal members for the Macarthur area, and at this same party the narrator is introduced to Ivan Milat, who he later in the book goes on to represent with his colleague, another lawyer called Tom Williams. Marsden was known for his close relationships with clients and political connections, so not out of the question that some very powerful people may have partied with Milat back in the day. Again, take this with a grain of salt, but it would be a weird thing for a lawyer who did work for Marsden to make up. So the book hinges on the narrator and Tom Williams apparently representing Milat in 1986 in an indecent assault case in which Ivan was alleged to have assaulted a 19-year-old woman in his truck after offering her a lift home from the Lumia Hotel. The 19-year-old escaped, apparently running from the truck down the highway to a farmhouse. The narrator details being warned by the magistrate about even representing Milat. The case looked pretty doomed until when the victim eventually took the stand, she changed her entire story. not unlike the earlier kidnapping case I mentioned, with the victim claiming on the stand that she kissed Milat and wanted to have sex with him. The narrator is very confused by this, but wins the case because of the victim's new testimony, and after the trial, Milat apparently explains the victim's about-face to the narrator. "Mate, I had full confidence in my legal team. All I can say is that the girl was a slut. Mind you, it does help when you know where she and her family live." The chapter ends with the narrator reflecting in brilliant prose. For me, I was scratching my head deep in thought. Milat was no retard. He was dangerous. The narrator then claims that John Marsden wanted them to lose the case as he was afraid of Milat himself. Look, it's a really weird, confusingly written book, but it gets even stranger. There's a chapter in which the narrator sleeps with the actress daughter of a major client of Marsden's, only for her to go missing that same night, with Milat becoming a key suspect. One of the main cases detailed in the book is the narrator defending a man accused of having sex with a pony, which, quite funny, as back in the day, there was a pretty widely circulated rumour about Marsden and donkeys. I'll leave it at that. The book also details how the narrator's lawyer colleagues suspect that Milat is an organised crime figure. But perhaps the weirdest chapter is the one in which lawyer Tom Williams is apparently drugged, tied up and raped by Milat's niece, who the book names Danielle, and her mother, Milat's sister, who the book names Veruca. Again, I don't know how much of this, if any of it, is true. Please do not take this as fact. It's just such a bizarre thing for a lawyer to write about his ex-client's family. The book's central plot is propelled after this event when the lawyers start to suspect something is up with the Milat family and are told by Marsden about a suspicious hut Ivan owns deep in the Belangelos. Long story short, the lawyers organise with a police officer who suspects the Milats of being involved in the disappearance of the narrator's date to go investigate Milat's hut. When the lawyers get to the hut, the cop reveals that she's bent, turns on them, ambushing them with Milat. A dramatic chase and escape follows. Then apparently the lawyers move on with their lives. And the backpacker murders happen a few years later. Weird spin-off movie. Suffice to say, this is all very interesting given that we know police corruption was endemic in New South Wales at the time. Another bizarre fact about this book is that Tom Williams appears to be the real name of the lawyer that the author worked with at Marsden's firm, not a pseudonym. At the end of the book, the author reveals that Tom Williams was murdered in 2004, shot in his own home after his accountant defrauded him of $80,000 and hired a contract killer. This part is true, verifiable and public record. Apparently, this same Tom Williams represented Milat. The other strange thing about this book is that you can't seem to find it anywhere anymore. It seems to have just been mysteriously pulped Australia-wide, despite the fact that there were apparently talks about turning it into another Milat movie. Now we can get to the backpacker murders. As I mentioned before, it took a relatively long time from the first disappearance in 1989 for police to finally get Milat in 1994. In fact, New South Wales Premier John Fahey unveiled a memorial plaque in February of 1994, months before Milat was arrested. It was only after another Milat victim, British backpacker Paul Onions, came forward and reminded police of his ordeal in 1990 when Milat made a failed attempt to abduct him along the Hume Highway that Milat was finally ID'd in court.
Ivan Milat could still be at large and still be killing if it wasn't for this young Englishman and his love of adventure.
I went through all the pictures and that was the one that gave me initial reaction. It made me uneasy when I looked at it. And then when I looked closer, I said to him, that's the person who I think I met that day.
After Paul's information, Ivan Milat was arrested, charged and went to trial.
Again, employing the services of John Marsden as his defence lawyer. Speaking of, another fun fact and weird coincidence, guess who was one of the first lawyers at Marsden's law firm? The New South Wales Premier at the time of Ivan Milat's arrest, the man who unveiled the memorial plaque, John Fahey. Here's a pic of them together in 1968 when the law firm had just been created. So when Ivan Milat was arrested, New South Wales Labor was apparently sniffing around to find out if John Fahey had ever represented Milat in any of his many prior cases. Apparently he didn't, but still, what another amazing coincidence, and demonstrates what a small place New South Wales really is. This is not even me hinting at anything. It's just bizarre. There's so much more to go into this story. Many important figures, details and events that I didn't even mention, such as Ivan Milat staging a hunger strike over a PlayStation 3 in prison. But such important matters as that, I think, require another video, so do let me know if you like this little rabbit hole and if you're interested in taking a look at some of the other unsolved murders and disappearances that could be Milat related. Again, I have to stress, this video was true crime, not journalism. Actually, not even true crime, more like true or false crime. A lot of this stuff has to be coincidental, but god damn, What incredible coincidences. What a fun way to be fooled into learning about the great state of New South Wales's political history, eh?
Well, that was a bit more wacky than usual, wasn't it? Only slightly, because I am doing a show about aliens in Melbourne tonight, Brisbane the next 2 nights, and then Shepparton for some reason. Also Wollongong, so make sure that you get your tickets for that, and if you liked that, let us know, because we do have more tales from the Crypt Keep. Probably not a good idea to publish them, so we will be needing a lot of support for that. See ya.